Oh, Suji has a special guest in the background. But welcome back to the Azure podcast. Today is the 17th of March in 2022, and we are on episode 416 today, talking about Azure Purview. On Teams with us, we have our very special guests, Amber Zhao and Karen Ekberg, as well as our usual host, Suji, Kale, and myself, Cynthia. Before we get started with our special guest, as usual, we have a couple updates we wanted to share. Kale, do you want to start first?
Yeah, sure. I got a few here today, but the one that's most important to me, but really is less probably important to Azure. There's this just came up. If anybody watches like normal like TV shows today, like reality shows, there's this new show called Domino Masters, where these guys basically stack dominoes in these like crazy configurations, like a competition. And the reason I call it out is I saw the headline, and this gentleman Claudius used to work at Microsoft with us. He worked directly with me when we were doing blockchain stuff years back, and great guy. He ended up leaving and starting a startup, but he's going to be on the TV show next week. So I wanted to call that out because Claudius is awesome, and we've done a lot of work at Microsoft together. So it was super cool to see that he's doing something with that kind of exposure. More relevant news around Microsoft and Azure was I got three things here. One is around our circular data centers, we call it, which is basically an initiative around the sustainability group that's inside of the Microsoft Cloud, and how we, when we use the term circular centers, basically how we are able to intelligently and sustainably basically decommission things from Azure in a circle, right? So as things are born and come into a data center, they have a life cycle, and then as they're eventually decommissioned, how can we be better at our carbon footprint and how we handle the waste that's coming out of there, and maybe not waste, but like used items, all the way from like our supply chain and selling those things that don't include data and things like that, obviously, but and then how we actually decommission things that have to be destroyed or whatnot. So pretty cool thing, and it also uses a lot of the Azure services like Dynamics, Power Platform, kind of our own dog food there around how we kind of manage that. Second thing was around Azure Health Data Services. I think we brought this up a few times on the podcast before, but there's been some more announcements around using AI and some of our data platform for healthcare. And this is specifically like deep integration into things like the FHIR protocol, how transformations happen between like different kind of objects that are like in a hospital type environment, DICOM, all the different kind of protocols that are used to communicate, images, data, things like that inside healthcare. So there's a lot of work we've been doing in that space from an industry perspective. And so all the things that govern like how the PHI data is handled through, like, as I mentioned, protocol level things. So super cool stuff that's been launched there and continues to grow. So take a look at that. And the last piece I had was around, scaling the partner ecosystem. Partners are huge, Microsoft, ISVs, SIs, and whatnot. And there's been some new enhancements there for our partners. One was around the private offers that exist in Azure are now have this margin sharing, which basically allow partner to partner kind of ecosystem to grow. So instead of it just being Microsoft working with a partner, the partners can actually work together and can share margin to basically grow their business and their products. So that's super cool. There's a lot of talk around, the digital landscape, how COVID, even pre-COVID, a lot of people were going more digital adoption for like sales and things like that. And it's just accelerated with COVID. So something good for our partners there. That's all.
Thanks, Kale. Suji?
That's pretty good, Kel. Yeah, so I have a couple here. The first is related to the app configuration service. And believe me, I didn't know we had a service called app configuration until recently, until I started using it. And it's a very cool service. As developers, we always have config files that we put in our applications, and everyone has their own config file, and that can be a problem. So this way, there's a service out there. It's been around for a while. As I said, I just discovered it that can host your configuration in a central place, and then all your app developers can point to that same place and avoid any discrepancy in their configurations. But related to that, they've added 2 new features now. One is a soft delete feature. Obviously, configuration is something you don't want to accidentally delete, right? So they've added a soft delete where you can delete it, and within 7 days you can kind of undelete it if you have to, if you made it by mistake. And this, related to that, they also had a feature where you can disable the hard delete. So it's not possible. You can set a policy where it's not possible to actually delete. You have to use a soft delete. So both of those are just meant to avoid any mistakes made with the app configuration. So take a look at that. And the other one is related to our PostgreSQL. We had Prabhat and Sunil here just a few episodes ago to talk about PostgreSQL and Azure. And they've added a few new features there, 2 of them actually. One is related to like running Lambda function, like style functions instead of Postgres, so they've added that extension in Postgres. And the second is they've added the timescale DB extension, which allows you to run time series databases in Postgres. Both are extremely valuable to our customers. So take a look at that. Cynthia, over to you.
Thank you, thank you. So there's one that is really exciting around the public preview of private link support for Azure API management. Before we know that it is available for VNet integration through the developer tier and the premium tier, of course, but now that with private endpoints, you're actually able to use it across the developer basic standard as well as premium tier. And there's just a lot of very exciting updates around this now that you're able to use private endpoints so that you're able to control the network traffic between the client in your private network as well as API management so that it doesn't have to go through the internet and it goes through Microsoft Backbone Network instead. So you're not exposing any traffic into the public internet. And we see that as like a constant ask from a number of different customers. So definitely check that out now that it is in private preview. The other thing that is now generally available is a best practice assessment for SQL Server on Azure virtual machines. There is actually an assessment that goes through your configuration on your VM to see if you're set up the way that we would recommend as Microsoft. You're able to just start it whenever, or you can also schedule that to start at a later time, and you're able to see the results and how you can improve upon your configurations. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Amber and Karen. Amber and Karen, can you tell us what you do at Microsoft and introduce yourself as well? Amber, you want to start first?
Okay, thank you. This is Amber Zhao. I'm based in Redmond. I'm senior data engineer in FastTrack for Azure. And this is my 11th year in Microsoft. My career started from the Microsoft intern. I was working for SQL Server, and 10 years ago, I moved to Azure. And so it's really excited working on Azure, the data service. I'm glad to be here. Thank you very much. Back to you, Karen.
Great, thank you. Karen Ekberg, I'm a program manager in the FastTrack for Azure team. I've been in this role for about 2 years. Prior to that, I was a technical account manager in our West business. So that's my role. Thank you.
So just starting us off, what is the Azure Purview service and which customers or what type of use case should we look into to use this service?
Azure Purview target as the data governance, the service. So it's been announced last September GA. And for the use case, when the product go GA, so we saw even before GA, we saw a lot of customers come to us to FastTrack, ask, can you start from the test, Azure Purview? So the scenario that would be data governance and catalog, lineage, and classification. This will be very helpful for customer to manage their multiple data source.
And when you say multiple data sources, what are some of the data sources that is available to be managed through Purview?
Yeah, currently, so Purview support more than 40 data source, not just Azure and it cross cloud, Azure, AWS, Google. So Azure, so the Azure stack like the SQL Server and also the Azure SQL database, managed instance, and Postgres, and MySQL, blob storage, AWS Gen 2, all those already be supported using Purview to scan those data source. And meanwhile, so it also supports AWS S3, AWS RDS. And it's just announced the Google BigQuery, so GCP also being in the support list. And so on-premise, we know for the data domain, so there's a lot of on-premise data, SAP CC, SAP HANA, and SQL Server, so it also be support for those on-premise Teradata. And we know in the big data domain and in the analytics domain, so Snowflake will be a famous one. And so Snowflake connector just announced last December. So that will be a new one, the connector data source that's being supported for the Purview. Yeah.
When you say data governance, like the thing that jumps into my mind are things like, you know, when I have Outlook and I have like policies or like things that are set in there that basically say, hey, I can't forward this email or I can't like screenshot this email. What does it mean like data governance like with SQL Server? Does it do the same thing? Does it like control what I can do with it? Or is it just purely a tagging classification type system?
Not just the classification. So so in data governance, we have some pillars. The first one will be catalog. So catalog will scan data source, ingest this metadata to Purview. So which means that the user, the reader, or the data curators, all the audience, they do not need to access the physical data source like the SQL Server. They just access the data governance platform, so it will be the Purview. So it's just a metadata, no any real data, raw data. So it's more protected data. And the second will be second would be if I use the example you just mentioned, so the policy. So policy is also pretty the big one. So from the policy. So currently Purview already support the policy. So we can define the policy from Purview and approve or deny the access to the physical data source. If I use example like the AWS Gen 2, so we can create a policy. We want the user access. That user could access the AWS Gen 2 or deny the access. So this will be a central place to manage access. And another one will be, so the classification. So we just talk about the classification. And Purview has 206 built-in classification. So this classification also come from Microsoft 365 information protection. And so all those built-in, when the Purview scan the data source and ingest the metadata, and this built-in classification will be applied. And if there's any like the PCI data, the person name, or you want to figure out like some SSN, we know this is like a pretty standard. We want to classify the data. So this classification could be applied during the scan. And meanwhile, the user also can create their own classification. So if they have like, I want to based on my employee ID, so that's pretty unique for based on the company. So user also can create a custom classification. So that's pretty nice. So yeah, not just the classification, policy, catalog, lineage. Lineage also will be very nice one, since in the lineage, we can track end-to-end from the data source, the movement from data to the destination. It could be maybe have some multiple data flow from if the user using the data source like Snowflake, and then they want to move the data to maybe AWS Gen 2, and then move data to the Power BI. So we can track the data flow from the Snowflake to the AWS Gen 2 and to Power BI. This will be end-to-end track where data come and where the data eventually to serve.
So from an application developer perspective, if I'm accessing any of these databases today and we introduce Azure Purview in the middle, does that mean I have to all the requests go through Azure Purview? How does that work in terms of the data access to the applications? Like how is Purview going to know that, hey, this application is accessing this database or is moving data from here to here, for example?
Yeah, for the application, so we know application is a front layer. So if the application, that is a web application, so the application, the transaction will go to the database. So Purview, the data governance, that's more handled with from the data layer. So if the application called the data layer, if you're using the SQL Server, and a SQL Server had moved the data, like I use the store procedure and insert data, and then I use the query to query. So the Purview just announced last week is going to support lineage for store procedure. So that will be a new one. And so there's another type application, if the application would be SAP. So we know SAP is pretty large, so it will be application now, not just a database. Since the SAP behind also has a database. So Purview support SAP CC, SAP HANA, SAP BW from application level to track, to ingest the metadata and also track the lineage. This lineage will be static lineage. Will display the relationship between table, view, and streams.
I'm curious from Amber and Karen, with the customers you're working with, what are some motivations that a customer would want to look into a service like this one? And before this service was available, what are some ways that people had to do all of these tasks that you mentioned? Because I think from a customer perspective, they would always want to know, like, how data is moving across different systems. How was it achieved before Purview?
Yeah, I can go a little bit into that and let Amber finish it out. But so as a program manager at FastTrack, a lot of my job is working with the nominators. They could be from the field, our account teams. They could be from the customers themselves or our partners. And so a lot of times for Purview specifically, they're looking to build that data catalog where they just didn't have it before. So just that core basic need, I honestly am not sure what they did before. That's something I should know. But just to build it out from the baseline, and also security is a huge driver too. They want to know what credit card numbers, social security numbers are, where they've been, who's looked at it. So that's been a lot of what we've seen, at least from my perspective, and the projects I've done to date. But I'll let Amber add some more there.
Yeah, for the catalog, so there is an Azure Data Catalog V1, so that is the old version, and so we also see some customer using that one. That's probably focused on the catalog. So the Purview, that's not just a catalog, we know. So it's also lineage, classification, and policy. So it's expand the broad scope, and so the customer the customer could using some open source technology if the lineage is not available, and so classification that's also available in the information protection, but that's kind of like for Microsoft 365. So now we have everything. We have those catalog, classification, policy in Azure. So that's remote. That's make more customer more easy to use this data source and manage the data source using the Purview. Yeah.
And with all of these various data sources that are currently supported, is the level of support the same across all of them? In other words, we can do lineage across all of them. We could do, the protection, et cetera, across all of them, or is there some different level of support that we have based on the data source?
Yeah. So for the lineage, for the support, so currently, so we have the two level the lineage, two type. The one is like the static. So for the static one, so for the data source, it will be more the demonstrate the relationship between the objects, the metadata. And so another level for the support that would be for the dynamic lineage, or we call it runtime lineage. So we know we using ADF pipeline and a Synapse pipeline, we could copy the data or move the data from the source to the sink. So that is the built-in lineage for the Purview, and it will capture the real-time, the runtime data movement for the lineage. Yeah, so these are two different support level for the lineage part. Yeah.
How should we think about the different roles that have access to Azure Purview, given that it at the same time can see into so many different services?
Yeah, that's a very good one. So the Purview has multiple roles that's available, so the user can easily to manage the who can access, who can manage. So so there's it's not just based on RBAC. We know RBAC, so we manage from the service, but the Purview give more granularity, the permission management, role management in the Purview service, in the Purview Studio. And so in the Purview Studio, so we can give like the collection of the mean and also the data curator, data source admin, data reader, and also the policy author and the flow workflow. That is some new the roles. And so in those roles, so we can give like, okay, we want all the user can read, can access Purview Studio. So just give reader permission. And we want some user to design the collection. We know in the Purview, multiple data source, we can organize the data source metadata under collection. Collection has a hierarchy structure. So the collection could be based on, application, based on the team. So it depends on how we design the collection. We manage the data source, manage metadata. And so if we want some user only, scan data source, not just, create a collection. So we can just give the data source admin permission, the data source permission, data source admin role. And if we want some user, they're not, not just a scan, so they're curator. So we can give the user data curator the role, so they can modify the asset, and they can link with a glossary term. So that kind of like for the data curator, yeah. And policy role. So policy is for this user only can create a policy and to manage policy.
Yeah, on the different data sources you've been talking about here, one question that came to my mind was like, how extensible is that? Is it something where like your team is taking input from the market and customers and partners, like here's the data sources we should plug in? You mentioned like Snowflake and SQL Server and stuff like that. Or is this something like that's going to become like extensible where I have a unique data source, right? And I want to bring that data in. How do I do that?
Yeah, that's a good one. So we hear a lot of the requirement for the extended data source. So I think they will go to two directions. The first one be the Purview engineering team. So they're aggressive to develop new connectors. So if that connector in the product roadmap, so it will be native connector for user to use. Pretty easy, pretty straightforward. Just go to the Purview Studio and register scan. So that will be native connector. And meanwhile, so there's also has the GitHub, and we have the volunteer from Microsoft to develop the accelerator. So the accelerator using the Python script, the REST API, and you can build your own the connector, your custom connector. Yeah, that's another way. Yeah.
I know both of you have mentioned the word FastTrack before, and it's been a while since we've had that described on the show. So maybe one of you can just explain what the FastTrack program's about and how customers get access to that team.
Sure. So as evidenced by Amber, she's actually one of our service lead for Purview. So our engineers go very, very deep in the technology. But we're a complementary program to customers. It's nomination based, and we are really looking for projects where we can do two things. First, to help the customer deploy quickly the right way the first time. So we're really looking for customers where this is a first workload that they will be deploying. Say IoT, they've never done it before. They want that engineer like Amber, who goes very deep, to work with them side by side, advising them on what steps to take. So it's not hands-on. It is totally advisory, where we'll understand what their end goal is, what the criteria is, and we're really looking for customers who are ready to deploy within 3 months is our ideal. So if that's a timeline, we understand their drivers. Amber will work with them if it's data, for example, and knowing what their end state is, work with them side by side on the portal to make those design decisions to get that to that end state. So number one, just to help customers deploy quickly the right way the first time. Number two is to help improve the platform. So Amber has been, again, key for Purview, and I think, Amber, there are around 129 engagements we've had for Purview before it even went GA in September. So a lot of what we do is not only we want to get customers who also want to deploy new things. Like Cynthia said, APIM, the networking piece is now in preview. If a customer is interested in wanting to deploy that as a new workload for DevOps or app dev, we would love to help them with that. So not only will we help them deploy, but then bring that feedback back to the product group. As I said earlier, this is complementary, but our ask then is for their feedback. So on the program, the platform, the entire experience. And so that's really FastTrack's role here, is to help those customers deploy and again, improve the platform all up across all solution areas. So thanks for that plug, letting us tell a little more of the FastTrack story and FastTrack Azure.
Yeah, no, it's been a while since I think we had Alex Uy a while ago. I mean, more than 2 or 3 years ago. So it's about time we got a refresh on FastTrack. So thank you for that. FastTrack for Azure. I know there's a separate FastTrack for Microsoft 365, which is unrelated. Yeah. This has been great. Yeah, Cynthia, any more questions for the team here?
Amber, any words of advice for people, customers that want to try Azure Purview? Where should they start?
Yeah, so I will encourage customers. So we have a lot of the document on Azure Docs. So if customer want to get started, so they can just go to a document and see which connector they want to use. There is a step-by-step how to use. And also I recommend all the users, you could go to FastTrack FT Live. So we host the FastTrack FT Live session every month, and it's open for everyone. So just register. We are going to go through how to use the Purview for the fundamental, all the concept from the Purview. So yeah, that would be another good channel.
Yeah, and
That's
if they're
awesome.
if they're ready to deploy, like definitely they can go to the FastTrack Azure site and then submit a nomination to self-nominate too.
Great point.
Thanks.
Definitely. We'll make sure we include those links in the show notes. Any last words of wisdom that you want to share with our listeners? Sujit, go ahead.
I do have a quick one actually now. So from, obviously cost is something that all of our customers think about, right? And so when onboarding something like Azure Purview, what's the cost component that they should be? I know that, it provides a lot of value, so it's difficult to say, this is going to cost more or less money. It could be saving them a lot of money in the long run. I understand that. But what is the actual dollar denominated cost for something like Azure Purview? How's their Azure spend going to increase by having this service?
Yeah, so the Azure Purview has multiple meter for the cost. So it depends on customer using which component in the Purview. So basically, they are going to use the computer resource that's behind the scenes. So when customer provision the Purview Studio, it always has computer resource, and this has a cost. And if customer want to using the classification also has a cost. And if they are going to search, and it also depends on which data source they are going to use. Since for different connector, the price has a little different. So it really depends on customer which component they use. But I think the good would be it's not just the big cost for everything. It's just break down the more detail which component the customer going to use. Yeah.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Also, huge shout out to Karen, who was my mentor when I onboarded to my previous role, and I'm really excited that I finally got her onto the Azure podcast. And Amber, thank you so much as well for sharing all the abundant information around Purview. And that is all we have for today. We'll definitely make sure that we include a lot of the information and links that were mentioned. And thank you all.
Thank you very much for having me here. Thank you. Bye.